Yeah, good morning, everyone, and thanks for joining us this morning. My name's Trevor Cook. I'm the VP of Sales at Anchorus, and we're joined today primarily by Henry Lewis, who's the Head of Platform for London Borough of Hackney, who, as you know, is going to talk about how G Suite empowered 4,000 of their staff to work remotely and continue to serve the community during the lockdown period. We're also joined by Richard Grime, who's a customer engineer in the Google public sector team. Both Richard and I will spend 30 seconds or a minute each introducing our respective companies before we hand over to Henry, who's going to tell you the story of Hackney. So very quickly about Anchorus. We are a Google partner and have been since 2010. We work across all aspects of Google technology and their cloud-based technologies, both G Suite, their public cloud, GCP technologies, Chrome, and we've been the partner who have worked with Hackney over the last 2.5 years to help implement G Suite throughout the borough. Relevant to this audience, we are on G Cloud, so any of the services that you would like to work with from Google can be, we can work on that basis through G Cloud. We're a multi-award winning partner. Most recent awards were probably relevant is winning the UK IT Industry Services Company of the Year award in 2019, which we're very proud of, and very happy to be introducing Henry today and to talk through the work we've done at Hackney. As I said, we work exclusively with Google. So let me introduce Richard Grime, who is in the Google Cloud team for public sector.
Thanks, Trevor. As Trevor said, I'm a customer engineer within the public sector business at Google Cloud. It's great to be here. Thanks for the invite, and great to hear from Henry shortly on how this is kind of working for Hackney. We're really proud that our solutions can support people during this extraordinary time, whether that's scaling out Meet and the other productivity tools to help people work from home, or solutions like Contact Center AI. So we've been using that to provide virtual agents to public sector bodies that are under significant pressure at the moment in terms of responding to demand. There's a few other areas like supporting research. So we have over 4 million data scientists on the Google Kaggle platform, and they are kind of currently working in collaborative projects to extract key information from large open source data sets. So thank you, Henry, for taking the time to talk through how this tech has played a role in Hackney's ability to respond and your ability to continue serving all your communities remotely.
Thank you, Richard, and good morning, everybody. As Charlotte said, I'm Henry Lewis. I'm the head of platform at Hackney, and I've been around for the majority of the time during our Google journey, which is what I'm going to focus upon today. I'm going to talk about our journey and in particular focus upon our experiences during the pandemic. I think because obviously that's very topical and important, because I think it also really highlights how and why Google and some of the other technology choices we've made at Hackney have been important and how they've been able to pay off. So I'm going to start off briefly by taking you through Hackney's technology framework. So we have a kind of tagline that we use in Hackney IT, which is that we want to deliver services so good that people prefer to use them. And that's really because we aspire to be able to deliver services which feel similar to the way that people would consume IT services in their private lives. We really don't want technology to feel like it's some kind of legacy public sector IT thing. And what that's really about for us are systems that allow our people, our staff, to be able to work remotely and flexibly in the field, systems that are intuitive, and particularly ones which support collaboration and effective communication. That's really important in the context of the types of services that we deliver and in the context of the pandemic. So we've had, where obviously we have people in adult social care and in children and families, and who are working very closely and needing to collaborate with people in the NHS. And because we have teams, for example, on our homelessness team, who are working with a wide variety of voluntary sector agencies in order to get people off the streets and the support they need in order that they can achieve better outcomes in their lives. So that's an important backdrop to what we do. The other thing I wanted to mention was what we describe as our web first strategy, which is a more of a technical thing, but it's about the overarching principles that we adopt whenever we make any of our technology choices. So we want to be able to access systems from anywhere, obviously securely and over the internet without having to use a Windows desktop. We want people to be able to use any device, and we want primarily to use services that are deployed through the cloud. And I'll talk a little bit more about some of these things later on. So why did Hackney choose G Suite, and how did we implement it? So we chose G Suite primarily because our colleagues told us that they preferred it. You know, we are signed up to the digital declaration, and we use things like a service assessments as a way of making to validate all of our technology choices, whether that be about the systems that we buy or the systems that we build. And obviously the service assessment process focused primarily upon delivery of user needs. So our colleagues told us they preferred to use G Suite in preference to Office 365. And that was because they felt that it was a set of tools that they could take up very, very easily. They found them intuitive to use. And at the time when we ran these trials, which was about 3 years ago now, we also got a lot of feedback that one of the things they liked about G Suite was the fact that all the applications behaved the same way, whether you were accessing them on an app, on any type of device, and or through a browser. People involved in the Office 365 side of the trial were confused, where they found that, at least at the time, a number of these applications behaved differently. So that's why we chose G Suite primarily. And it was also because obviously it's secure. We found it very easy to administer, and because we found that it was affordable. How did we implement G Suite? Well, it's important to note that we had a dedicated team which we put together to do that, and we did that with support from Anchorus, who helped us primarily from a technical perspective in order to deliver the solution. Our approach focused initially upon implementing email and calendar, and then on use of other tools really as a nice to have. This was a practical decision which we made, mainly because we have an enterprise-wide document management system that we use, which it was difficult to migrate away from, and we knew that we couldn't adopt Drive wholesale right from the beginning. And what we found, because of the approach that we took, was that that worked well because there were large numbers of teams in Hackney who were able to basically just get going with those other more collaborative tool sets in G Suite, whether that be Docs, Hangouts, Chat, or whatever, without requiring lots and lots of support from us. Inevitably, though, there were some teams who I think culturally just needed a bit more help. And we're now testing a different approach to the way we do that in the work we've undertaken recently supporting Hackney Learning Trust, which is the part of Hackney Council which supports our colleagues in education. And with them, we're actually doing it the other way around. We've started off by focusing upon the collaborative tools like Docs and Chat and Meet. And actually what we're finding is that by doing it that way, we're actually getting much, much higher levels of engagement across the board right from the get-go. So that was a useful lesson learned on our part. I'm going to talk briefly now a little bit about devices, and in particular how devices helped, our strategy around devices helped during the pandemic. So we now deploy Chrome devices as standard across our organisation. We rolled out Chromeboxes and Chromebooks over the course of the last financial year. Our devices include Chromeboxes as a standard offer on desks, allied with Chromebooks for some people individually, and a very significant number of grab-and-go devices, which we issue as pool devices to almost all of the teams in Hackney. These have proved much, much more popular than we had originally anticipated. We thought that we would, at the beginning of this process, we thought we would probably be rolling out a majority of Chromebooks to people personally. It's actually, I think, about 20% of people in Hackney have personal devices, with the remaining 80% all accessing Chromebooks in a pooled way. And that was a really, really good outcome for us, because it's obviously more efficient. And that was a situation that was working really, really well before the pandemic began. And I'll talk a little bit about what happened when the pandemic kicked in a moment. So the other area where we've invested in devices was in the specialist Meet equipment, which we set up in approximately 50 of our large and medium-sized meeting rooms. We found that that was pretty well utilised to begin with. We found that it meant that many of our management teams in particular were able to start holding their meetings pretty much electronically most of the time. And it also meant that it was easier to manage our relationships with external people and with a number of colleagues in parts of Hackney not based around our main campus. When the pandemic hit, obviously things changed. And we were faced with a situation where in the first 2 weeks of the pandemic, we needed, in effect, to get 4,000 employees set up to work from home. We had assumed that they would primarily use their own devices when working from home. But what we hadn't calculated was that while most of our employees do have devices at home, we hadn't realised that many of those devices would be needed by other people in their families. And as a result, there was a greater need for devices than we'd anticipated. So the grab-and-go Chromebooks, all 800 of them, became non-pool devices. They became devices that we made available to our home workers. I would love to be able to tell you that we were able to take those 800 grab-and-go Chromebooks and prioritise them according to those who had greatest need and issue them on that basis. Unfortunately, that is not the way it happened. One of the slight disadvantages of grab-and-go Chromebooks being their accessibility. Within the first 2 days of lockdown, they'd all basically been grabbed and they had all gone. And whilst they are certainly very useful devices, in some cases we would have probably preferred to be able to prioritise their use. But I think that's an inevitability about providing devices in that kind of accessible way. So as a result, we therefore had a significant number of people without a device. So what we ended up doing was we ended up refurbishing the old Windows laptops that we still had following our device refresh. And in a week, we put Ubuntu on them, we put Chrome on them, and we deployed them to those home workers who now use those and are using those perfectly well, because obviously Chrome's a light touch operating system, which you can operate on old Windows laptops. So that worked very well. I wanted to touch briefly now on online meetings during the pandemic, because that's been an area that we have put a huge amount of focus upon as an organisation and as an IT team. So it's our priority. It was our priority in the short term to obviously get people to a place where they could meet online, collaborate online. And we also had, pretty much in the first week, started the conversations with colleagues in democratic services about how we could support the council to deliver virtual council meetings. Because obviously the old-fashioned way of doing those in old-fashioned committee rooms was not going to work. Google Meet has been a vital product in supporting us in that regard. In terms of the meetings, the more straightforward meetings that we undertake, our staff have found it really, really easy to use. It's also been a system where people joining us from other organisations have also found that it's a system that has been easy to use. And that's by no means a trivial issue, because much of the work that we have been doing as I said earlier, particularly in areas like social care, is collaborative with other agencies, with the police, and in particular with the NHS. So the fact that Google Meet is straightforward to use and accessible to people from our external partners is really, really important. The other thing that's been really helpful is the ability to record and live stream meetings. About 3 weeks ago, our chief exec and our leader did a live stream to all of our staff, which attracted, I think, over 1,000 people, talking about the pandemic, talking about how pleased he was with everybody's response to that, and talking about our plans for the next phase. There have subsequently been other similar meetings, and they have, the feedback we've had from our staff is that streaming these sorts of meetings online and giving people an opportunity to see senior leaders in the flesh is a much, much more effective way of communicating to people in comparison to old-fashioned mail shots. And obviously it's through using Meet that we've been able to expedite that. So that's been really, really helpful. There are other things we need to focus upon in driving forward what we do around online meetings. So there's been a high level of demand for collaborative tools so that people can in effect carry out workshops online. And in that respect, we're very, very pleased to see that Google are planning to add additional functionality to the product set so that, for example, breakout rooms are things that are going to be coming on board before too long. That is certainly something that will help, not least because we now know that home working is something that will be with us for the longer term. We carried out a pulse survey of all our staff quite recently, and the preliminary results of that survey suggest that over 85% of our people want to continue working from home for at least 3 days a week in the longer term, even after the pandemic is over and the lockdown restrictions have been eased. What this means for us is that we have to be able to deliver services online which are as good as people would be able to experience if they were in our office space. And we have had a very, very good start in trying to achieve that with the tools that we have at our disposal already. In fact, actually, because the tech is so good, our emphasis hasn't been so much on the tech. It's been about things like protocols and good etiquette when using online systems, particularly in the context of things like virtual council meetings, when it simply isn't appropriate if somebody's child flits in and out of the screen in the middle of a debate at planning committee. So we spent a lot of time focusing upon helping people to structure the way the more formal meetings should work. We've also spent a lot of time helping our colleagues to access our online systems where our partners host them, because some of those systems are more difficult to access than Google Meet is. And we've also been spending a lot of time working with colleagues in the NHS and police, because sometimes they prevent their staff from accessing Meet on devices that they manage. That's a big issue for us. We know that Google Meet is secure. The NHS recognise that Google Meet is secure, but sometimes struggle to communicate that across what is obviously a very, very large organisation. So, final part of this webinar, I wanted to focus upon accessing systems and how we do that. So, I mentioned earlier that we have a web-first strategy. As part of that web-first strategy, we want to be able to have all of our applications deployed over the internet outside our local area network. And quite shortly, all our office buildings are in effect going to be, to all intents and purposes, very large Wi-Fi hotspots where staff and the public alike can access systems using Wi-Fi. And all they need to do that is to touch a button, and once they've done that once with one click, they're then in a position where they can access systems in those buildings for 3 months without any need for any further authentication. At that stage, of course, all they're doing is getting access to the internet. What we then use for our staff is Google single sign-on to authenticate access to our council services. And we use Google single sign-on to do that wherever the application is concerned are browser-based and meet the appropriate encryption standards. The benefit of this has been that it's very significantly reduced the burden on our network during the pandemic. I would say about 50% of our staff don't have to use systems deployed through our local area network at all. And that's made a big difference, because I think if all 4,000 people had had to do that, we would have had to focus a lot of time on bolstering that network and deploying new infrastructure to support that level of home working. And we've had to do a little bit of that, but nothing in comparison, I think, to some of the work that some of our colleagues in other London boroughs have had to do. So G Suite is a crucial component for us in delivering this strategy. It's crucial because it provides a really good user experience for people accessing systems outside the internet. And that helps us to get the message across to our colleagues about why we want to do this similarly with all the other applications that we deliver. And it helps us to make sure that we get the right procurement decisions when we are looking at getting away from some of our legacy IT. And it makes it straightforward for us when we're building new digital products as well. So G Suite has been really crucial to us in terms of the way that we've managed during the pandemic. And it's a crucial component really in the way that Hackney IT deliver our strategy and in our future plans for technology in the borough. That, I think, is probably more than enough from me. So I'm going to hand back to Charlotte now to see if people have any questions.
That was really great. Thank you, Henry. So welcoming you guys to answer any questions. Okay, so we've got a question here for you. So interested in the comment around breaking down silos within the organisation. Do you have any examples of G Suite and how that's helped with that?
So I think the most recent example of it is about our experiences during the pandemic and using Meet. I think it's been, paradoxically, far easier to collaborate online than it ever was when people were attempting to do it in a physical office space. In essence, it's a bit of, so I think if you were in the same office with people, you tend to orient yourselves towards meetings with your closer colleagues. It's a bit, being online is a bit of a leveler. Everybody's in essence in the same place. And the other issue, obviously, is that you can do large meetings much more easily. So typically now we are doing meetings which potentially can have 15, 20 people in them. And that enables you to invite people from a much wider group of areas than would typically be the case, and to do it much more quickly. And that has become much more routine. And that is helping to break down barriers and break down silos. And that's been really, really useful for us. How we continue with that as some of our teams go back to our office space is something we're thinking about quite hard now.
Great, thank you. We've got another question here. Are you able to compare overall costs to Hackney with an alternative present in which you had stuck with an alternative solutions of the same scale?
Oh, I mean, I guess we could. It would probably be a hefty piece of work to try and do that in detail. My sense is that Google saved us a huge amount of money, but more importantly, what Google's enabled us to do, and our overall tech strategies enabled us to do, is to not only make sure that we can sustain service delivery in a really important time, but also to be able to focus and stand up new services, which have been vital to us during the pandemic. Because I think that without these tools, and without in particular the ability to be able to collaborate across teams, it would have been much, much harder to achieve. So in that respect, it's everything from the new style governance that is now in place at a senior level, where you have senior people and members coming together much more frequently and sometimes more informally than previously, to other examples. So for example, we have spent a huge amount of time and focus on food distribution and distribution of medicines as well in Hackney. And again, that's involved really sort of new teams of people drawn from different parts of the organisation coming together, and their ability to work effectively relies upon collaboration and really good collaborative tools. So yes, I think it would have cost us a lot more money had we not had Google, but more importantly, many of the vital things that we've done in the last 3 months during the lockdown would simply not have been possible, or would have happened much more slowly.
Thank you. That's a really interesting question here. Have you had any challenges with engaging community groups virtually? So especially those that might not have access and experience of using the tech. And if you've kind of overcome those, do you have any tips?
So that's a huge question, and one which we are in the middle of trying to grapple with now. So I mentioned that we focused a lot on distribution of food and medicines in the early weeks of the pandemic as an organisation. So that was a major strategic demand to be able to support the most vulnerable in the borough so that they had enough to eat. Where we are now focused as we enter the next phase is absolutely about all these issues around inclusion. So we are working with people in education around the deployment of devices to people in education and in schools. I'm doing a lot of work with people in social care, where we're trying to get devices to people, particularly vulnerable elderly people, so that they can get online, so that they can talk to their families, and so they can do things like online shopping. And we are putting a great deal of emphasis generally on how we can drive forward the wider agendas around things like connectivity in the borough. That is, so we're spending a lot of time and effort looking at those things. I would be a lot, but we have not solved those things. These are obviously difficult and sometimes intractable issues. And obviously it's about more than just delivery of devices and connectivity. As I think the question implies, it also requires people to have confidence in tech. It requires people to believe that that tech is secure, and it requires us to support them in terms of learning. And how we do that, and how we do that well, is something we are testing out, not just as a council, but also in partnership with a whole range of voluntary organisations in Hackney as well. So there's a lot of work on that, but we don't have any answers just yet.
That leads quite nicely into the next question around how did you train staff on G Suite? So did you do videos, live webinars, one-to-ones?
So we took a very different approach when we implemented G Suite, the way we might have approached these sorts of things 5 or 10 years ago. So we didn't do any online classroom-like training. We spent a lot of time putting together things like Google Communities and encouraging people to come together to share information in that way. We put some basic guides together, and we also invited I think in total we had about 200 Google champions who we identified for each of the service areas in the organisation, and worked with them and through them with their colleagues in order to help them engage and get involved with all things G Suite. I think the other thing that we have been trying to emphasise, though, is that we're advocates of learning by doing. Google G Suite, I think, is an intuitive tool set, and the best way to learn how to use G Suite is to start using G Suite, and to ask people and ask colleagues, and sometimes, and also I think to the other thing we've done is we've looked at things like case studies, examples of how different services in the organisation have managed to change the way they work and deliver better outcomes for our residents, and how G Suite has played a role in supporting them to do that. And also encouraging those services to advocate on behalf of G Suite themselves, rather than us necessarily doing it as an IT team, mainly because we don't want everything to come across as, because we don't want G Suite and implementing G Suite to be viewed as a tech thing. We don't think it is. We think it's a service transformation tool, and therefore we want services to be upfront and talking to their colleagues about how they've done that.
Great, thank you. Last couple of questions. there any tips on getting buy-in from users who may be stuck in their old ways?
Yeah, so obviously, so I would be a complete liar if I argued that we had engagement across the board from all people at Hackney. We haven't. I think it is about providing examples of things that work. It's about recognizing that sometimes you need to intervene more directly with people who need help. So one of the new services we've started delivering in our IT support team, actually since the pandemic began, is the concept of what we describe as a home working health check. And as part of that health check process, our team proactively focus upon people we recognise are struggling a bit. So they might be new starters, they might be what we describe as our frequent flyers, the people who contact us needing support quite regularly. Or it might be people that we can see need help because they're using vast amounts of data and probably don't understand how to set up their systems and use Wi-Fi. These sorts of people. And we talk to them about their setup, and we talk to them about how to access systems, and we talk to them about how to use things like Hangouts and how to use G Suite tools. So there's something about focusing to those in greatest need as well, I think.
Great, thank you. Just last question before we wrap up. Has there been any sharing of tech strategy lessons? So maybe how you can help other boroughs and councils? So
we're very, very keen on sharing. We put most of the information about most of our projects on Pipeline. We also blog regularly, and we do that externally. So one of the things we do, because we use Agile pretty much across the board now, across all aspects of what we do in Hackney IT, is we produce week notes, and many of those week notes are published externally as well as internally within the organisation. And we're also, we also talk regularly with other organisations, particularly public sector ones, and particularly other London boroughs who have a kind of like-minded view about the way they want to approach delivery of technology. And we're always very happy to talk to other councils about their experiences and to learn from them, as hopefully they can sometimes learn from some of the things that we have done.
Henry, one last question that's also come in, and I'd like to expand it slightly. The question was around how important was it that the political lead from the mayor, Philip Glanville, but also, I guess, generically, how important was it to have senior stakeholders really behind the implementation and behind the rollout?
So that's a really good question. I'm gonna answer it slightly differently. So I think that getting political backing to what you're attempting to do is completely fundamental to delivering what we have delivered as a Hackney IT team. I wouldn't necessarily focus specifically upon the decisions to go Google, although they were involved in that. I would say more generally that we are extremely fortunate as an IT team in that the most senior people in the organisation have backed us to work with the organisation to help deliver the types of user-centric, resident-centric change that I've talked about today. And recognise that to do that, they need to invest in us as a service. It helps, for example, that the Mayor, Philip Glanville, is our portfolio holder, and that our director, myself, and various other people meet with him regularly, so we know his views and we know that we will gain his support. And likewise, that goes across the spectrum, really. Yes, with members from time to time, there are issues to do with their own IT setups, which we grapple with. But from a strategic perspective, we get their support because they buy into that overall vision. And without that, I don't think we would have gained any traction with G Suite. I don't think that we would have gained the traction we have with a whole variety of the other things we've done either.
Great, thank you. So if there's no other questions, we will be sharing the recording round with everyone. Please do reach out if you've got any other questions. Henry, that was really fascinating to listen to. It was a great session. So thanks everyone for attending, and reach out if you have any further questions.
Thank you.